Humanity has been wondering for thousands of years if we really are the only living species in the universe. Many people are sure that we are not the only intelligent race alive in the vast infinity of space. Thanks to the ever-mounting quantity of evidence we have before our eyes, especially in this modern period where communication and observation is advanced, many answers can significantly lead to proving the existence of not only one, but many races and alien species who have lived on the Earth in the past, and probably never stopped living here up until the present day. It seems that we are getting to an increasingly obvious situation. The real question though, will we ever know it one day? Those who know everything, when will they understand that the population is ready to face the truth? From sightings of unidentified flying objects to reports of close encounters of the third kind, reports of alien sightings are increasing in number every day around the world. While some people believe that aliens are here to study us and help us evolve, others fear they are here for less noble purposes. There are of course theories suggesting that the government knows a lot more about the UFO and alien phenomenon than they are telling us. Around the 1950s, scientists had many hypotheses about extraterrestrial life, but they didn't have mathematical formulas to define these analyses. Until the astronomer Frank Drake had a great idea. He thought that since science is exact and doesn't lie, then why not quantify the odds of finding life in the universe? Drake wrote a simple equation to try to calculate the existing civilizations in our galaxy capable of sending signals that we could still pick up today. The entire Drake equation contains 7 variables. The formula starts from the total number of stars in our galaxy. It takes into consideration how many of those stars have planets, and how many of those planets can support life. How many of them have intelligent life, and above all, how many evolved life forms are able to send signals through space. An initial calculation showed that there could be as many as 10,000 planets in our galaxy, ours alone, with conditions suitable to host intelligent life forms. This immediately poses a problem. If there really are 10,000 of them, then where are they? On such a large scale, how is it possible that we, the inhabitants of the Earth, have never seen anything? Subsequently, the astronomer took these numbers in hand and re-performed the calculation. His new count reached as many as 1 million forms of intelligent life in our skies. With such a high probability that there is life in the galaxy, many scenarios become absolutely believable. How can we deny such a high probability of life other than our own as human beings? Maybe we're the only ones in the galaxy who haven't yet discovered what's beyond our planet. We are probably the only ones who do not take advantage of all the beauty that life could possibly be. However, many people in all these years, by joining the dots, have managed to understand that surely there are other species out in the universe. Thanks to researchers, scientists, and even ordinary people, we have come to have many testimonies and proof of aliens and UFOs that have visited our planet, and who still visit it, and even live here. These alleged extraterrestrial visitors appear to be very different from each other, some being described as small grey creatures, while others as tall, slender beings with large eyes. By now it seems that there really are multiple species of alien entities. Just thinking about the diversity that exists among us human beings, such as different skin colours, different facial features in different cultures, or even just the fact that we are not the only living beings on Earth, one can think that in a place as huge as the universe, there is an infinite diversity of worlds, with an infinite diversity of species that are living their lives in our own time. At this point, how can this option be excluded? There are absurd quantities of testimonies that describe many beings who are different from us, with powers, capable of communicating with thought, with disproportionate, anomalous features, seen here or in the skies. In the years of evolution they have lived with us, and they educated us. We are probably a result of their evolution. There may be many theories, but the fact remains that even just one true one would be enough, and it would certainly change our whole vision of the world. Sightings of UFOs and aliens are indeed a global phenomenon now, involving every single part of the world. Every year, there are numerous reports of sightings of unidentified flying objects, which cannot be explained by natural phenomena or known man-made technologies. The people have always wanted to tell the truth. They want to document what they see. Instead, the great powers have wanted to hide everything from us since the dawn of society, making us believe that we are alone in order to better control us, not accepting the beauty of life and the universe. But all this now touches many human beings who have found themselves having important encounters of the third kind in different parts of the world. Encounters with unidentified beings that have surely changed the lives of billions of people. Situations of amazement and disbelief that have always been hidden, not believed, or left unresolved for many years. People, now more than ever, want to tell their story, even if, however, in every studied case of UFO sightings, it is never possible to find an explanation. Those involved are often silenced, and everything is resolved quickly and secretly. Considering the multiple testimonies not only of unidentified objects in the skies, but also of anomalous encounters of the third kind, there are some that are more documented and famous than others. Testimonies that are clear before everyone's eyes, and which, as always, remain unconcluded and not well explained, because they are never brought to their true end. However, today we are able to tell these people's stories. The best known case of a close encounter of the third kind is certainly the Roswell case of 1947. An unidentified flying object crashed near the city of Roswell, New Mexico, and many witnesses reported seeing the remains of a disc-shaped object and encountering alien entities. This event started the legend of Area 51, and fueled the conspiracy theory about the government hiding the aliens' presence. After this event, human technology took off and progressed like never before. Coincidences? The great powers suddenly understood and invented a new vision of the world by themselves. The case of Travis Walton. Another famous case of a close encounter of the third kind is that of Travis Walton, which happened in 1975 and was the basis of the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. Walton and his team were working in the Apache Sitgreaves forest when, suddenly, an object was sighted in the sky. Walton approached the spacecraft and, thanks to an attempt to take a fragment of the object, he was subjected to an electric discharge that made him pass out and collapse to the ground. Walton disappeared for 5 days. He then reappeared and said that he woke up and found himself in a white room with beings who looked alike, who communicated through their eyes and said that they had performed medical experiments on him. The case of Betty and Barney Hill. The 1961 case of Betty and Barney Hill is another famous close encounter of the third kind. While they were driving in rural New Hampshire, the couple saw an unidentified flying object that followed them until they stopped the car. Later, they reported being abducted by alien entities and undergoing medical experiments. The case generated a lot of media hype, so much so that it was investigated by the US Air Force authorities, which tried to deny it. The case of Pier Fortunato Zanfretta. In Italy, one of the best known cases of a close encounter of the third kind is that of Pier Fortunato Zanfretta, which occurred in 1978. Zanfretta, a security guard, reported being abducted by aliens in a wooded area near Toriglia, Liguria. During the encounter, the alien showed him an apocalyptic vision of the Earth's future. The case of Jodie Foster. In 1997, actress Jodie Foster said she saw a UFO and told her friend Christopher Nolan about it. However, the description of the facts of the event told by the actress did not have the support of the press, and also for this reason, Foster ended up having to abandon the lead role in the film Contact. The case of Carl Sagan. One of the most famous episodes concerning alleged extraterrestrial alien interactions concerns the astrophysicist Carl Sagan, known to the general public for his ability to communicate astronomy in a simple and poetic way. According to Sagan's testimony, in 1954 his mother would have been shown an alien by Carl's father, who would have been very upset by the event. According to some theories, Sagan is still in possession of documents regarding that close encounter of the third kind. The Caponi Case. Another famous Italian case of a close encounter of the third kind is that of Filiberto Caponi, which took place in 1993. And it is precisely on this case that our attention should be focused a little more. We are not only faced with a very important case of a close encounter with verbal testimonies, but it is the first time that we also have recognized, authentic, certified, true photographs of an extraterrestrial on our planet. Polaroids, various Polaroids of a small and frightened creature in the Italian woods. On May the 9th, 1993, Filiberto Caponi had his first close encounter of the third kind with a being never seen before on Earth. Filiberto has now told and explained his story many times and to many people, and like all events of this type, it has been believed, it has been denied, it has been denounced for many years. By now, however, we are all able to recognize that there really could be some reality in all of this. We can open our eyes and allow ourselves to find some truth in this story. Filiberto Caponi lived in a small town in the Sibillini Mountains. At the time, he was only 23 years old, so he was just a young man. He says that that day he was returning from an evening with friends, a quiet evening like any other. He points out that he had consumed absolutely no alcohol or other substances and was therefore completely sober. Filiberto continues, saying that he was taking the road that would have led him to park his car in the garage. In all of this, he had his radio on at a fairly high volume, yet at that moment he managed to hear what seemed like a voice, a very high and particular sound, a scream that came from outside the car. Living in the countryside, he points out that he is able to recognize many types of animals by their cries, but that in this case he hadn't really been able to figure out what living animal would make that cry. He describes it as a very guttural sound. It reminded him of a large cicada, as if everything was amplified by a large microphone. Doubts immediately besieged him, precisely because it was a different sound from all the others. Then Filiberto decided to lower the volume of his stereo to hear better, and he heard a sharp and strong shrill, alternating with smaller verses, very similar to a lament. After parking the car in the garage, he got out and says the sound was getting louder and it seemed to be getting closer to him. He didn't quite understand if it was him who was approaching it or vice versa, but initially he didn't see anything, he just heard the cries. He decides to retrace the route taken by his car, but on foot, backwards, and as he goes towards the origin of the sound, he stops at the corner of the street. A strange play of lights had been created, forming a dark triangle due to the placing of the wall and the lamppost. And that's when Filiberto realizes he's not alone. He makes something out right in the heart of that dark triangle. He initially describes it as a kind of gnome. The upper part of his body is dark, the lower is light. He realizes that it could be a living being. The closer he gets to it, the more its cries decrease, as he perceives it. He approaches the being, standing about 2 meters from it. Being so close, he manages to see that it looks like a leather or plastic bag, and convinced of this, he decides to stamp his feet on the ground to see its reaction. The being leaps at least a couple of meters into the air, and it comes to life by changing its shape, assuming a picturesque humanoid form. Filiberto describes it as having small hanging arms and longer legs than it should have had. It wore torn bandages and dirty white rags. Around its body, it had a kind of bag that inflated and deflated, a speckled head with no ears and no other features. It recomposed itself in a bizarre way. It seemed to have no joints. Then it started running down the middle of the road. It then slammed into a stone wall, and climbing over it, it ran away. Filiberto's first reaction was shock. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. He decides to go back to the garage, and after a few moments of panic, he heads home, unable to hide his shock from his parents. Somehow, the boy tries to explain the situation to his family, describing the being as a kind of gnome. His mother and grandmother hardly seem to want to listen to his words, and his father, distrustful, decides to go with his son to the scene of the incident, to see the situation with his own eyes. In fact, there on the ground, his father finds a piece of white fabric, slightly dirty, with pink reddish stains. They decide to go home and hide the evidence under the washing machine in the house, to avoid anomalous contacts. Unfortunately, the next morning, the piece of fabric is gone, and Filiberto points out that even during that night, he heard the high-pitched and non-human sound very close to their home, discovering later that he was not the only one in the village to see and hear the being that night. Many inhabitants had heard strange noises, farmers saying that something had frightened the sheep. After this confusing and absurd experience, Caponi and this creature will meet on several occasions at different times. But what makes this story unique in the world is the presence of officially recognized photographs taken by Filiberto himself, from his second encounter to their last. What that creature could be tormented Filiberto continuously. He spent several sleepless nights constantly thinking about that being. Like many others at the time, Filiberto owned a Polaroid camera that he kept in his room, and it was precisely on the night of May the 9th, considering that he had spent many long nights awake, that he heard that loud, high-pitched and particular sound again. He immediately got out of bed, grabbed his Polaroid, threw open the door of his house, and from the corner of the neighbour's house he saw a shadow stretching along the sidewalk. The being announced itself with its shadow, which then started approaching him. Then he loaded his camera and prepared to take a photo when the creature reached him. He heard the sound of small steps in the silence of the night, small, almost mechanical noises, signalling that the being was approaching. Suddenly, a small, forward-leaning figure appeared, walking along the road that passed right in front of Filiberto's house. In that moment, he stamped on the ground twice with his foot to scare the being, to show him that he was there. But nothing. The being continued to advance. This is the exact moment that Filiberto, in a panic, decided to take the first photo. The flash from the camera froze the being for a moment. Then it turned on its heels and started running in the opposite direction. Filiberto removed the first photo and placed it on the doorstep of his house. The being was running away, and Filiberto started running after it, with the camera held up to his eyes. The being ran faster and faster, and Filiberto decided to take another Polaroid. After the flash, the creature screamed intensely and Filiberto fell, slamming onto the ground. Unfortunately, the being ran away and the boy remained on the ground. After all this confusion, Filiberto's father woke up and found his son outside the house, terrified, but this time with evidence. The two decide to go back inside and wait for the two photos to develop, because a Polaroid picture requires about 15 minutes to do so. His father apologized to him for not having believed him earlier, because those photographs perfectly portrayed a being. It was certainly an extraterrestrial, an alien, or at least a creature that had never been seen before on our planet. In these first two photos, you can see this little being with its head leaning forward, and you can also see part of its nape when it runs away, and another strange bundle it's wearing can clearly be seen. In any case, Filiberto and his father officially had two elements of proof of the existence of something beyond their knowledge, something that probably had nothing to do with life on Earth. Later that night, the photos were placed inside a box that also contained other items inside. Filiberto puts it on the bedside table and decides to try to get some sleep, if he is able to. The next morning, he wakes up and immediately smells something burning inside the room. He quickly discovers that the smell comes from the box where the Polaroids had been placed. He opens the box and notices that the photos have been modified. It was as if they had been burned, but without holes or signs of burns. Simply the images were now in relief. The surface of the photo had swollen. In fact, the photos that they now saw did not portray the form of the being accurately, Filiberto points out. In the photos you can see a kind of egg, but you can't see the head sticking out, which could initially be seen. It seems that it was the being that burned and edited the photos, probably to leave no traces. Then there is also the missing piece of cloth hidden in Filiberto's house during their first meeting. Maybe that had been recovered by the being itself too. As mentioned, Filiberto had numerous experiences with this extraterrestrial being, and in fact they don't end here, because there was actually a third meeting, an encounter that also gives us other proof and another official photograph. The incident takes place on August the 10th, more precisely on the night between the 9th and the 10th, the night of San Lorenzo in Italy, otherwise known as the Night of Shooting Stars. August the 10th was Filiberto's birthday, and as he does every year, he decides to go and look at the sky to see some shooting stars. Initially, everything was normal. He hadn't noticed anything, but at a certain point, in a corner, Filiberto realizes that a figure was present. It was sitting there, in full view, almost as if it were posing. The boy didn't even hear it. He didn't notice its arrival at all. Filiberto was immediately petrified. He didn't know what to do. He describes it having the face of a tortoise, as if it were a large turtle. He says it had dark eyeballs, and initially he didn't understand if it was a skull, if the eye sockets were hollow. Then, looking better, he saw that it was a single eye, because there was a reflection of light inside it. In fact, Filiberto specifies that this being was attracted by street lamps, or any source of light. The alien seemed to be interested in something else, not in Filiberto as a person. It didn't care much about him. It was as if Filiberto were part of the landscape. Filiberto says that it didn't look at all like a sentient being with whom one could interact, but that it looked more like a kind of machine, a robot. After a few moments of panic, however, Filiberto returns to the house, grabs his Polaroid camera, looks out of the window to check if the being is still there, goes downstairs, and extraordinarily manages to take the third Polaroid photo of the being. As had already happened, the being begins to inflate. That sort of bundle it is wearing inflates too. It arches its back in an absolutely abnormal way, and then runs off. Filiberto specifies that in the photo it looks like a large being, but in reality it was about 30 to 40 centimeters tall. The boy decides not to put the third photo inside any box, but to sleep next to it, keeping it on his pillow. He even decides to wake up every 5 minutes to see if it burns, and in fact, the next morning the photo is intact. He was only 23 at the time and initially didn't know who to turn to. Searching and asking around, he decided to get in touch with the CNR, the National Research Centre. He contacted them with a letter and a phone call. They wanted him to send the material, but Filiberto decided to invite the CNR to his home so as to be sure that the material was not used in different ways. The CNR promised that they would visit him, but then no one ever showed up at Filiberto's door. In the meantime, however, it must also be specified that Filiberto was not the only one who tried to report these events, because several articles came out in the area where they announced that other people had also seen a strange little humanoid being who jumped and swelled and who went around the city or nearby military areas. In the following days, a news troupe arrived in the town to interview the various inhabitants about the appearance of this gnome that several had met. Filiberto, a few days later, given the various false rumours and the various nonsense articles that were being written, decided to tell his truth. He decided to tell his story and show the photographic evidence that he himself had taken. One photographer in particular was so amazed by this story that she decided to make the truth public. In fact, she published a real article on the incident, together with the photographs depicting the extraterrestrial. While the news spread and gained more and more attention, the surprises for Filiberto didn't end there. In fact, the boy, right at that time, was starting to build a small laboratory under his home. During the evening, he did some cleaning and was reorganizing the space. He decides to go out to throw away the garbage, and it is right there, in that moment, that Filiberto Caponi had his fourth encounter with the extraterrestrial being. He sees it, the alien was there, but this time, according to the boy's description, the being was different. It looked more emaciated, like it was completely burned. It was of a brighter reddish colour, but always tending towards brown. It no longer had anything on. It was completely naked. It no longer had the white bandages it was wearing, not even the bundle that inflated and deflated attached to its body. Another difference from the other being was that it had small white tubes coming out of its chest, very close to each other. Filiberto, in that encounter, was very shocked, precisely because the being seemed to have taken on another form. Similar to the other encounters, the boy realizes that the alien remained still, motionless. It was just staring at the lamppost, therefore a source of light, as if it didn't even notice Filiberto. Taking advantage of the situation, he runs into the house to get his camera, and once again manages to take 2 authentic Polaroid photographs. After these shots, the being starts moving, assumes its usual position, leaning the nape of its head on the hump on its back, crouches and, frightened, runs away. Filiberto in turn recounts that he also ran into the house, frightened, immediately showing the photographs to his family, which, however, caused terror in the quiet life of his mother and grandmother more and more. Meanwhile, the news spread more every day, and in the village there was often talk about what the creature might or might not be, because Filiberto wasn't the only one to have seen it. The article became very famous, and Filiberto had with him more and more photographs and more evidence. His gathering of proof is interrupted only after the last, but not least, extraterrestrial appearance that Filiberto Caponi experienced. We are in the month of October, exactly towards the end of the month. This event is described by Caponi as the most magical of all his encounters. He begins by saying that in that period he often stayed with his grandmother because she needed care, and therefore he also found himself sleeping in her room during the night in case of an emergency. Before going to sleep, Filiberto always went round the house to check if everything was closed. But one evening in particular, he noticed that the window was slightly open, and when he started to close it, he saw an anomalous appearance outside. It was the creature once again. It was standing motionless in front of an abandoned house right in front of the boy's house. Filiberto explains that this time it was different once again from the other times. The alien was fully upright. It was the first time he had seen it standing erect, reaching a height of about 70 centimeters. In a panic, the boy decides to wake up his grandmother to make her understand that the creature really existed and to show her that it wasn't something evil, but simply different. After many attempts, he manages to convince his grandmother, and together they go outside the house to see the creature that is still standing motionless in front of the abandoned building. They decide to stay at a certain distance, and when the alien is clearly in view, Filiberto is amazed by his grandmother's reaction. He thought she would be frightened, that she would scream and she would react with shock, but the exact opposite happened. It is as if a link had been created between his grandmother and the creature. The woman immediately felt a great sense of empathy and tenderness for the being, a connection, as if it had spoken to her telepathically. Literally a magic moment. In all those encounters, Filiberto had been focused on understanding what the being was, without ever thinking about why it was there and that maybe it needed help. In fact, his grandmother's first reaction was to ask Filiberto to leave the being alone, because she understood that it shouldn't have been there, that it was in the wrong place, and surely they were just making things worse. She said that they should leave it alone because it was none of their business. Filiberto, even more shocked by his grandmother's reaction, decides to approach the alien, scaring it. The being immediately emits a grunt and runs away. Filiberto doesn't hesitate, and with his grandmother yelling at him not to go, he starts chasing after it. They are both under a dark arch. Filiberto says that the being entered the arch but didn't come out, so for a long moment they remained in the same place, in the dark. But here too Filiberto reiterates that there was no kind of anomalous event. He manages to take the last Polaroid of the being and then runs home, to his grandmother. This Polaroid is the most disturbing, where the features of the creature can be seen almost perfectly. Now, in an upright position, it seems that we can categorize it as a flying humanoid. This is the last piece of the various photographic evidence of the story of Filiberto Caponi. At the time, a simple boy who experienced the most sensational close encounters of the third kind. Filiberto's story does not end simply with some photos in hand, therefore with clear evidence of a possible lost extraterrestrial alien, probably by mistake, in our solar system. Because when these questions arise, when we talk about UFOs, it seems that everything happens in a precise and fast way. Apparently the Italian police were also interested in Filiberto's story, wanting to hide the truth, leading to Filiberto having to lie about what he had been through. Initially, Filiberto was contacted shortly after the famous article with the photographs, first by the CUN, then by various ufologist scholars, and finally he was contacted by an Italian TV program where he decided to participate to tell his story. And this is where the serious trouble with the police began. A few days later, the news had become worldwide, and the police immediately showed up at Filiberto's door. Storming in, they decided to seize everything from him. First of all, the photographs. He was immediately sent to trial, something that in a nation like Italy is very unusual, because usually waiting times when it comes to legal issues are much longer. But for Filiberto, a 23-year-old boy, they decided to act immediately. Filiberto now officially declares that he had literally been put in such a condition that once he got out of there, he had to redimension his story. He had created too much chaos within society. Filiberto was criminally charged for disturbing the public peace and for spreading false or tendentious news. In the police reports, Filiberto read that during that period, people were calling, scared to death, after seeing the news on TV, thinking about the strange being that roamed the city. Reiterating the aspect of the speed with which this case was dealt with by the police, Filiberto never even went to court. A judge shortly afterwards decided to exonerate him, obviously with some restrictions. Caponi recounts that just as he was leaving the police station, they stopped him and threatened him by subtly telling him that it was better that he stayed out of this case, because it was neither his nor their job to stick their noses into these affairs, reiterating the fact that the important thing was to keep people calm. However, an unusual doubt remains, that they took this matter extremely seriously, unlike many other situations with a higher degree of urgency. The photographs were seized for 5 years, Filiberto points out. Thanks to a famous Italian art critic who then became interested in the boy's story, Filiberto managed to get back his Polaroids. According to Italian law, after 5 years that material remains with the police, it automatically passes from seized to confiscated, thus passing into their property. It was really a lucky coincidence that Filiberto, just within the limit of 5 years, with various legal aids who requested an act of release from seizure, managed to get back his photos. He was accompanied to court with 2 lawyers and a guard. The photographs were inside an envelope closed by sealing wax, with a stamp on it. The Polaroids were opened, and, without recording anything in the official records, Filiberto was given a container, like a briefcase, quite futuristic for the time, and had been told by the state to keep the photographs inside it for the rest of time. In the case the boy wanted to see them, he could open the briefcase for a limited time of 5 minutes. He specifies that it was orange in colour, and he had actually been told that it was a product not yet on the market. It was used in very few secret structures, but that it wasn't harmful. It was only used to store the photos to avoid deterioration. After a few years, however, Filiberto met a radiologist in a hospital who was carrying a briefcase, orange, square, not rectangular like his, but very similar. Curious, Filiberto then discovered that it was a new type of container which they used to store X-ray plates so as to avoid deterioration. Why did they give an object of such great value to an ordinary boy for mere photographs? Filiberto concludes his story, pointing out that first, when he checked the photos, he noticed they had been examined a lot. Most of them were scratched and numbered. Behind the photos there were even missing pieces that they had removed, cut out to better analyse the material. And second, that the secret orange briefcase that had been delivered to him had really not been officially documented, that in the final release report everything that had been given back to Filiberto was recorded. Except for this particular orange container. How come? Why did they have to hide this detail? All of this makes one think about how important these photos were considered. It makes one think about how much this situation, if made public, could really change the evolutionary course of history. There are too many strange actions made by governments that are increasingly coming to the surface. Why hide such an intelligent evolution? The whole story of Filiberto Caponi, which is only one in a million, is it possible that it is all made up? But why? For what purpose? That encounter remains the last of Filiberto's encounters of the third kind. He is now 52 years old and claims that he has never had to deal with similar situations. Even though his life has certainly changed since those days, he decided to believe what he had been through and decided to make the truth public, somehow fighting, together with ufologists and scholars, to inform the world about this possible life form that isn't human. Filiberto also points out that the place where he lived has always been recognized as a mystical place with regard to the UFO topic. Many ufologists study that territory, and many testimonies tell stories of sightings. And there were other photographs taken by 5 firefighters who at that time were on a helicopter mission. They saw and photographed this being in the same period as Filiberto's encounters. These photographs were obviously seized by the police, and the recordings from that day were also withheld. In these recordings there are the 5 firefighters who report seeing a flying humanoid, which was literally about to crash into them. They declared that they had to make an emergency maneuver to avoid it, then they had to land to check the status of the vehicle. When the pieces of the puzzle come together, the truth can come to light. The creature that Filiberto met is certainly very special. It could take on many forms and could communicate with thought. We are in 2023, and in all these years, after much research and testimony, there are theories that explain in detail how many alien species exist, how many alien species have always been in contact with human beings, and that they still live here on the Earth. If we tried to create an identikit based on sightings and numerous contacts, the conclusions that will eventually be drawn will not be so far from the truth. Let's start from a very general classification based on the first visual impact, a classification that we could define as more aesthetic than scientific in nature. Humanoids. Though they have a very human-like appearance, instinctively none of those who have had the opportunity to see them thought they were actual human beings. Small, not greys. The testimonies described them with green skin and sometimes covered with hair. Animal creatures. Beings very similar in appearance and movement to animals. Robotic creatures. Clearly mechanical or metallic looking beings, sometimes completely made of metal or of a very similar substance. Then there are some species which are the most important and which are part of the macrostructure of the alien races. The Greys. Probably to be assimilated to altered states of consciousness or to visual expression stimulated by external elements. They would be, in practice, the aliens described in the films that many claim to have actually seen. The first case in which they appear is clearly identifiable with that of Roswell. There are many witnesses, both civilians and ex-military, who claim to have seen the bodies of some aliens with grey skin and who were about 1 meter 20 tall, in July 1947. While indicating a very specific alien race with the term Greys, many substantial differences are noted within them. This leads us to think that there are various species of Greys, perhaps with the same intentions, but not all similar to each other. Classic Greys. Height, about 1 meter 20. Skin, light grey in colour, very smooth to the touch. In some cases wrinkled or full of swellings. Musculature, thin, dry, the muscles seem limp, without any tone, sometimes so reduced as to seem even adherent to the bones. Hair, completely absent. Only in some cases it has been described as dark or light blonde in colour, but it is very probable that they were hybrids. Hands, they have the characteristic of having 4 fingers. Eyes, often described as covered by large, dark and soft lenses. Removing these particular lenses, the eyes are actually very large and inclined. The pupils take on a blue or brown colour. From their skin, in some cases the loss of a liquid almost similar to our sweat has been described, but with a more acidic smell. It is probably a method to expel toxins, and this would justify the bad smell. The structure of the brain. A skull much more developed than any other known would allow these beings to compensate for the evident lack of muscular strength, by contrasting it with a remarkable psychic and telekinetic ability. The many testimony reports regarding their ability to move surprisingly fast has given rise to the hypothesis of a possible interaction or manipulation of space-time. The Nordics. The first to mention these extraterrestrial creatures, later catalogued under the name of Nordics, was the famous American contactee George Adamski. In his books, he describes them with blonde hair, often long, and blue eyes. Their height is estimated to be around 1 meter and 75 centimeters. Still, according to Adamski, some of them would have already been living on Earth for some time, under a terrestrial identity. Another great supporter of this alien race is the Swiss Edward Billy Mayer, who openly stated that he had had many contacts with them, especially in the years between 1976 and 1979. Even the Admiral and great US explorer Richard E. Byrd reports to have had contacts with the Nordics. The events took place in 1947, but the description of the aliens does not coincide with the one previously reported. Classic Nordics. Height: approximately 1,90 m to 2 meters tall. Skin: light in color and free from defects. Musculature: prominent but at the same time harmonious. Hair: light blonde. Hands: similar to ours with 5 fingers. Eyes: mostly light in color, larger than normal and set fairly slanted. They appear to possess the same reproductive abilities as us humans, and the ability to change their molecular density using thought. Reptilians. The reptilians are also particularly well known because they are part, or seem to be part, of that mysterious historical heritage so dear to fantarchaeology. Legends and stories from all over the world tell of beings with features very similar to those of reptiles. Seth, the Egyptian god to whom the crocodile was sacred. Yam, the dragon god of the sea of the Sumerians. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the Aztecs. Rereading the testimonies on the matter, it seems that there are several reptilian races, some also of the amphibioid type, that is, with the ability to survive even in water, others of the insectoid type, due to their resemblance to insects. Classic Reptilian. Height: about 1,80 m to 2,20 meters tall. Skin: hard, smooth and scaly, brownish in colour. Musculature: strong and often far superior to that of humans. Hair: completely absent. Sometimes ridges or bumps have been noted on the skull. Hands: the hands have 4 fingers, 3 plus an opposable thumb. Eyes: quite large, with a golden iris and pupil. Physiology and posture very similar to humans. They certainly possess the same reproductive capacity as we do. The Anunnaki. Revered as gods by the Sumerians, it is assumed that they actually come from the planet Nibiru. During the last close passage of their planet with the Earth, a mission led by Enki was sent, and which took place mainly in the valley of the Nile and in Mesopotamia, favouring a rapid social and technological development of the pre-existing civilizations. It is therefore a fundamentally benevolent civilization, which, however, did not hesitate to exploit the mineral resources of our planet. It is possible to deduce the appearance of the Anunnaki from numerous archaeological finds. The Blues. They come from a portion of space between Cassiopeia and Andromeda. They are about 190 to 200 centimeters tall, are completely blue, and sometimes have a ridge on their head in the shape of a crest. They are thin but very strong. They have eyes slightly larger than human eyes and have no ears. These aliens have been seen by important contactees such as Martinovich and Collier. The Blues are not only based on space exploration and technology, but above all on spirituality. The Dargos. They are very tall, about 3 meters, and have a completely different appearance from the other aliens. They have spikes on the sides of their head, They are scaly and greenish in colour, with yellow and triangular shaped eyes and with scales instead of hands. The Dagos have also been sighted in Italy by Fortunato Zanfretta, who was kidnapped several times by these beings. As well as in Italy, they have also been sighted in many countries of Latin America. In conclusion, the documentary you have just seen has taken us on a fascinating journey into the world of UFOs and the different extraterrestrial races said to live on Earth and in the universe. Over the course of the narrative, we've been exposed to a wealth of eyewitness accounts, sightings, and alleged encounters with creatures from distant worlds. There are numerous elements that suggest that our species is not the only one to inhabit the universe. The vastness of space, with billions of galaxies and stars, offers endless possibilities for the development of life. We explored testimonies from people of different cultural and social backgrounds, all united by the experience of sightings or close encounters with extraterrestrial creatures. This convergence of experiences, while it cannot be taken as definitive proof, suggests that there may be more to the subject than what is officially recognized. Additionally, the documentary looked at descriptions of several extraterrestrial races that may be living among us, or who periodically visit the Earth. We learned about the Greys, with their peculiar physiognomy and their involvement in so-called abductions. Testimonies from contactees and abductees have provided interesting details about the interactions between these creatures and humanity. Similarly, we explored theories surrounding Nordic aliens, who are described as tall, blonde humanoid beings with a strong interest in our evolutionary development. In addition to these specific races, there have also been mentions of other extraterrestrial entities, such as the Reptilians, which according to some theories may be living among us in human form. These speculations have fueled passionate debates. There are still many unanswered questions that require further research and objective investigation to come to a clearer understanding of the matter, even though we are now aware of so many facts that have happened in all these endless years of history. However, what this documentary has tried to convey is the idea that the universe could be a place full of life, with other species that could be very different from us. This possibility raises important questions about our position and our role in the infinite fabric of the universe.